Good afternoon, July 16th podcast, and hello to my listeners. Apparently, I feel the need to address this issue. Major news involving Suchina Nation features massive news residential projects west of Calgary, an independent housing initiative, and lawsuit involving former lawyer. So, as an elder, this is just my own personal opinion on this podcast. And if anybody wants to do or say anything, hey, I'm open to any kind of discussion. Master Plan Community, you can find this on Google. The nations partnered with Qualico Community to acquire and develop nearly 1,000 hectares of land outside current reserve. The land lease arrangement with mirror projects like Redwood Meadows, creating economic benefits through 50-50 cost and profit sharing model. So I was in my youth when my uncle and other partners with Tsuutina Economic Development started Redwood Meadows. Independent housing plan. The nation has launched its own self-financed housing initiative, positioning its own resources to fund the project rather than relying on standard taxpayers' dollars. Again, this whole thing about trust funds. I mean, if you know, and if you don't, well, hey, Google it. Third item, Recovery Center lawsuit. Suchina is suing a former lawyer over alleged wrongdoing tied to construction of province's signature addiction treatment site on the nation's land, which faces multiple red flags. And as a nation member, when I first heard about this, I was just like, oh my goodness. The former chief sent one of the female band counselors up to Edmonton to talk on his behalf. And I said, what the hell? Wild animals like deer, the male deer sends the doe out into the field to check to see if the coast is clear. In case hunters are there going to shoot to kill. Well, that's what our former chief did with this female counselor. And she brazenly said, on behalf of the Tsuutina Chief, blah, 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 I represent this man. I'm going, oh my goodness, woman, don't you know you're the doe sent into the field to check if the coast is clear? Okay. A while ago, maybe a month ago, I was approached and by a consultant for the nation, and he did say things were going to happen. Now, also, too, because I'm a nation member, I've also had contact with various nation members who had accounting records and had been in contact with lawyers long before the elections happened. So there's a lot of stuff and a lot of innuendos that are going to come out of this, like what I'm going to post. Now, again, too, I want to let people know that I did try to go to the Toronto Globe and Mail, and I did try to read the article. However, they want you to have a subscription, and I'm not doing that. But Tom Cardoso and Kerry Tate published on July 15th this article, First Nations lawsuit against ex-lawyer links Sam Marchetti to Alberta recovery site procurement. Now, I might be saying his name wrong. However, I want you to understand the webs, the spider webs that have been sent out by this government in Alberta and separatism, these separatist movements, and this whole connection with the Premier of Alberta. This is my own personal opinion, okay? Don't shoot the messenger. Now, I'm going to do or have an article that was done by a reporter whose name is Alana Smith. Now, I forgot to put down where Alana works, but anyway, I want you to listen to this, and I will comment on this article, and I want you to listen to this, okay? Because This also affects Tsuutina. It affects Enoch First Nations and also the Métis Association of Alberta, because there are sites of procurement that are linked to this one person who's associated with Danielle Smith. Now understand this, when this treatment center was approved, and this article will tell you about the lack of transparency or how things were done without the proper policy protocol with our leadership. That's just my personal opinion. Okay, so here it goes. Oops, sorry, I'm still trying to get this going here. So Sam Marchetti, and I'm not too sure if I'm even pronouncing his name right, but a lot of this has been going on for quite a few years until it's come to this point now. So all the powers that be, all the people in Tsuutina who knew all this and wanted to get this exposed, it's finally come full head.
M. Raish, a medical supply entrepreneur who is at the center of a health procurement affair now under investigation by the RCMP, allegedly played an undisclosed role in a construction project for the Tsuutina Nation. According to a lawsuit filed in court last week, Megan Albu, the Globe and Mail, a First Nation in Alberta, is suing its former lawyer over alleged irregularities in the procurement of a provincially funded addiction recovery center, saying that he worked with Edmonton businessman Sam Raish and a former chief to sole source a $35 million contract for the facility. The Tsuutina Nation, a Dene community with roughly 2,500 citizens located near Calgary, filed a lawsuit in the Alberta Court of King's Bench last week against former General Counsel Terry Braun, alleging negligence, breaches of contract and fiduciary duties, and other wrongdoing in connection with the construction project. Tsuutina says its recovery center, which was being built by contractor Maluka Homes Limited, has been marred by red flags, including circumvented procurement processes, overpayments and duplicated invoices. It also alleges that former Nation Chief Roy Whitney and his family stood to benefit personally from the project. The Nation also alleges that Mr. Mraish, a medical supply executive and entrepreneur, played an undisclosed role in its construction project. For nearly a year and a half, Mr. Mraish has been at the center of a separate healthcare procurement affair that has shaken Alberta politics and prompted investigations by the RCMP and the province's Auditor General. According to the Nation's statement of claim, Mr. Braun directed that Tsuutina's correspondence be sent to Mr. Mraish during the project's early days, and an entity connected to Mr. Mraish allegedly paid nearly $50,000 to support community initiatives in the First Nation. Neither Mr. Mraish, Mr. Whitney nor Maluka Homes are named as defendants in the lawsuit, and they did not respond to a request for comment from the Globe and Mail. Mr. Braun, who has not yet filed a statement of defense, did not respond to a request for comment. The allegations have not been tested in court. Mr. Mraish first came to widespread public attention as a result of a wrongful dismissal lawsuit filed in early 2025 by Athena Mensalopoulos, the former Chief Executive Officer of Alberta Health Services, who was fired by Premier Danielle Smith's government. Ms. Mensalopoulos' lawsuit raised concerns about her agency's contracting processes and alleged ties between senior Alberta government officials and private businesses, including some owned by Mr. Mraish. He has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing in connection to the controversy. The Tsuutina lawsuit marks yet another complication for Ms. Smith's signature addiction treatment initiative. The province has earmarked up to $350 million for the construction of 11 recovery centers, several of which are on Indigenous land. The government has previously said that once they are operational, the centers will be able to offer care to more than 2,000 people each year. 3 Indigenous communities selected to receive provincial funding for a recovery facility: Tsuutina, the Enoch Cree Nation and the Métis Nation of Alberta each hired Maluka Homes to build their recovery centers. Since then, however, the construction company has become tangled in a court dispute with a former business partner and other parties, including Mr. Mraish. The projects, which are at various stages of completion, are now mired in at least a dozen legal proceedings as builders, including Maluka Homes and its subcontractors, have allegedly gone unpaid. Citing the continuing litigation, spokespersons for Tsuutina and the province's Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction declined to comment. Planning for the Tsuutina Nation's Recovery Center project began in 2023. According to the Nation's statement of claim, the Alberta government, which is paying for the construction of Tsuutina's recovery centre through grant funding distributed by its Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction, began discussing the project with the nation in April 2023, court records show. A few months later, in early July, the nation and the province had signed a memorandum of understanding for a recovery facility, according to documents obtained by the Globe through an access to information request. Later that month, Mr. Braun directed that the nation's correspondence be shared with Mr. Mraish, according to the lawsuit, allegedly writing, "Please share this email with Sam." Tsuutina entered into a memorandum of understanding with Miluka Homes in August, according to the court filing. That document came approximately 4 months before a formal grant agreement with the province, and before any competitive procurement process, the lawsuit alleges. The agreement between Tsuutina and Miluka Homes noted that the contractor had paid the nation $40,000 to support community initiatives, according to the statement of claim, but these funds were instead allegedly paid in 3 installments, totaling $49,000 by an entity connected to Mr. Mraish. According to the lawsuit, Mr. Braun was aware of a connection between Mr. Mraish and Miluka Homes as early as September 2023, when he allegedly wrote that Mraish Holdings was a holding company for Miluka Homes. Corporate filings reviewed by the Globe do not indicate that Mr. Mraish or any businesses connected to him have ever had an ownership stake in the contractor. In February 2024, Tsuutina awarded the $35 million construction contract to Miluka Homes. According to the nation's lawsuit, the project was awarded contrary to the nation's legislation and procurement policy after the contract was signed. Mr. Braun allegedly failed to act on repeated red flags, including duplicated invoices and an internal warning in December 2024 that the contract was not being followed correctly. By mid-2025, Mr. Braun had allegedly directed payments totaling $17 million, roughly half the total value of the project, to Miluka Homes when only 10% of the work had been completed. Tsuutina also alleges that Mr. Braun, while working at the behest of Mr. Whitney, the nation's former chief, disregarded the council's directive demanding invoices and the return of $3.75 million in project funds from Miluka Homes. A majority of Tsuutina's council, including its chief, was replaced during the nation's November 2025 elections. The nation's lawsuit makes several further allegations about Mr. Whitney, that he had been personally involved in discussions with Miluka Homes prior to entering into an agreement with the company, and that certain members of his family allegedly stood to directly benefit from a contract with the builder. Mr. Braun left his job as Tsuutina's general counsel last year. "It is with mixed emotions that I share that I am no longer serving as general counsel for the Tsuutina Nation," he wrote on LinkedIn in December. His post did not provide a reason for his departure. The Globe reported in March that Miluka Homes and its principals, father and son Louis and John Simashkiewicz, were suing Mr. Mraish and several others. They alleged that Mr. Mraish was the undisclosed directing mind of E-Holding Corp., a business development and consulting company that had worked with Miluka Homes on recovery centers in 3 indigenous communities, including Tsuutina. According to the lawsuit, Mr. Mraish worked with others to withhold project payments until Miluka Homes agreed to pay him. Mr. Mraish has denied any wrongdoing in his statement of defense and said his involvement in E-Holding was limited to providing casual, unofficial and informal business advice. Miluka Homes is itself being sued by E-Holding and its owner, Mohammed El-Dasauki. Mr. El-Dasauki alleged in a statement of claim filed last summer that Louis Simashkiewicz used a forged share sale agreement to unlawfully obtain control of Mr. El-Dasauki's business and bank accounts. Lawyers for Mr. El-Dasauki did not respond to a request for comment. Mr. Simashkiewicz and Miluka Homes have denied any wrongdoing in their statement of defense, with a report from Alana Smith.
Okay, so that's what I got online. Now, again, the understanding is like prior to the Chief and Council election, there had already been given money, like half of the money that was going to be paid to this treatment center. Like I said, this. Let me give you a background on this fellow here, because apparently he was instrumental in getting a treatment center that run by Indigenous people the educators of the treatment center were Indigenous people teaching Indigenous people who actually lived in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. They closed down that center. And this fellow here, this Mr. The one that's MR, anyway, that fellow associated with the province here. Now, at the same time, too, there's this web. Like I said, he's also attached. This company, these construction companies, are also attached with building a center in Kainai, which is shoddily built as well. Now, understand this too is like the paper trail in the whole scheme of things is like whenever there's a chief and council meeting, they basically do the paperwork to cover, like, okay, we got this investment, we're going to protect the people who have invested us. Now understand this, for decades, right from the beginning of the industrial schools, Indian residential schools, when they found oil in Alberta, the whole thing with oil companies, even with the Calgary Stampede, throw money to Indigenous people. Just throw it to them, because we really don't care about them. That's their attitude for First Nations, Inuit and Métis communities. So this whole drama of this man who, and also the lawyer allegedly in cahoots with our former chief. Now, again, too, I've grown up my whole, like, I know that the chief, I know his family, even the band counselors who basically, like, looked the other way while all this shit was happening. Now, prior to that, the head controller had all this paperwork of how the chief was siphoning money to his own family. And again, to understand this, various band counselors were doing this. And that's part of the colonial construct of how Indian Affairs set up and educated the old regime, the Indigenous people in my community who only had a high school diploma and were trained to do administrative work and got their claws into it their entire lives and taught this systemic racism in terms of administration. Now, a lot of people have been buying into this for decades, and there's been a small majority of people who, have left Tsuutina. The one fellow became a successful person, a consultant, our nation member. And in a band council meeting, right after we had our new chief and council, one of the former band members had the audacity to confront this young man and saying, look, you bid a proposal to Roy Whitney for, I don't know, 40,000 consultant fees, blah, blah, like, how dare you, you're rich, and you're trying to take more money from Tsuutina. This is coming from a Tsuutina female counselor in front of the entire chief and council band meeting, entire nation at the meeting. Now, the young man says, well, Roy Whitney requested this proposal and I submitted it because he wanted just paperwork. He says, but the reality of it is like, yes, this is my company and I'm hiring my own employees in my company to do the consultant work on behalf of on my behalf for my nation. He's not employed by the nation, nor has he ever been. But here's this band counselor saying, well, you're asking for this money. And he says, right now I'm working as a consultant. He says, and if you look at my contract, the only money I'm getting is $1. Like, he is trying to say to this Suchina Nation member, I'm only being paid $1. Understand this, a lot of the chief and councils who just have high school diplomas and who, again, I call it collective, holistic approach of governance. Like, people go, well, what? No, I'm talking about mental health here. When you have this man who is associated with this treatment center, who also instigated a closure of an Indigenous healing treatment center in Alberta that had run for decades. I even got trained with them. Like, my mother even got trained with them. And why? Because we know what it's like to live in Indigenous communities, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. And what does the Alberta government do? Shut it down. Now, understand this. This person we're talking about also has connections with different First Nations tribes in Alberta. Talk about pretendian cohorts and allies. Now, again, I've grown up amongst white people my whole life, and I've had, again, here's Danielle Smith being a pretendian cohort and ally, and you have this investigative reporter writing her speeches. And what does she do? She backstabs her. What does Danielle Smith do? She doesn't care. Part of the separatist movement too, it's amazing. It's amazing. I don't want to overindulge in anything, but here's one of the statements that came from Sturgis First Nations that let's see if I can get this here.
Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation Administration Update 6H. G notice to members following Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation's Cows and Plows settlement. The members' per capita distributions were placed in a trust fund. The PCDs for our minors were to be held in that trust fund until our children, born by 2017, turned 18. Jeffrey R.W. Raff Corporation. Raff PC is and has always been the sole trustee of these funds. This means he is responsible for holding them in trust for our children until they turn 18. In 2024 and 2025, 18-year-old members started to report discrepancies in the PCD amounts, below the original PCD or excluding interest. We pursued a court application to remove Raff PC as trustee and for him to pass accounts. We are working to expedite this application given the discovery this week. On July 13, 2026, we became aware of documents suggesting that Jeffrey R.W. Raff Professional Corporation, operating as Raff & Company, withdrew approximately $12 million from Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation's Miners Trust in 2023 and 2024. We discovered these documents through disclosure in the Tal Cree First Nation litigation against Raff PC, reported in the media. This was the first we learned of these withdrawals. We had not seen these before, have not seen financial statements for the Miners Trust since 2021 and received only financial summaries in 2022 and 2023. We have no records for 2024, 2025 and 2026. We have requested financial statements since 2021. We have not received a response. We are deeply concerned about these withdrawals. We are taking all steps possible to protect the trust money and track, trace and secure any illegal withdrawal from the trust. Finally, some members have reported that Raff & Company has advised that the nation has the trust money. This is incorrect. Raff PC remains the sole trustee, at present, of the Miners Trust Fund. On June 26, following similar discoveries, Tal Cree First Nation obtained a court order removing Raff PC as the trustee on their nation's trust. On July 10 and July 15, they received and extended a Mariva order to freeze Raff's assets up to $15 million, the amount said to be withdrawn from their trust. And, on June 15, Tal Cree received a receivership order which appoints a receiver to track and trace these funds. We would like to assure our members that we have watched these developments carefully and are acting accordingly. We will update members as soon as we can in the circumstances. Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation Leadership Federic Downat.
This fellow, Raff, is the leader of the separatist movement in Alberta, associated with the Premier of Alberta. At the same time, too, this fellow, who's Sam Mraiche, a medical supply entrepreneur at the center of the health procurement affair, is now under investigation by the RCMP. Okay, so all this connection to, the separatist movement and Danielle Smith. Now get this to the former mayor of Calgary, Mayor Nenshi, or former Nenshi, has said, he says, the corruption, another day, another lawsuit. Naheed Nenshi. The contractors scandal never goes away. It all comes back to Danielle Smith's close friend, Sam Mraiche. call for public inquiry right now. Like, excuse me, as First Nations, and when we talk about poverty, these young men and women who have actively done due diligence to file this lawsuit have done their homework. They know what they're doing. And no matter how many times you get up as an individual and you have a leadership discredit you, and they keep on discrediting you because they want to keep you silent. Now, I really have nothing to lose. I'm an elder. My background in terms of mental health and addictions, and usually, like when I'm talking when I talk about mental health, I'm not using psychological social work jargon. I'm talking as a narrator. But when I knew that they were going to have this treatment center, I'm going, what for? Like, I was in my 20s when I did the first draft for the first detox treatment center, all voluntary. And just the struggle to keep people working in these centers because of the lateral violence addictions workers were experiencing, and still do, because we know what it's like to live in Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit communities. Like, and then you have a pretendian saying, like, they closed down the Nietzsche Center. They go and do all this building construction under the guise of the Premier of Alberta, throwing money, oil money, to First Nations because they really don't give a damn. Shut them up. Give it to them. And what does our former chief do, this lapdog? This is my own personal opinion. I don't care if it upsets you. But the reality is I have sacrificed most of my life volunteering. First daycare, first treatment center, even advocating for, like, what the hell, the chief paying for Nathan Chasing Horse? 20 years of paying rent for his followers. Even when he was arrested, they paid for all of his followers to come back home. And here I am struggling to say this man is dangerous. Look at what he has been doing. And nobody really cared. Why? Because they're holding on to their jobs. You can rationalize it away until it Timbuktu. The reality of it is that it's so entrenched. And the fact that you have a treatment center that's going to be run by non-Indigenous people, hiring non-Indigenous people to work, as well as having clients who are non-Indigenous being treated in First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities. Because this isn't just Tsuutina, this is Enoch First Nations and the Métis Association of Alberta. Now, Suchina has taken the initiative to challenge this, challenge the paper trail or the money trail of the construction company that has been listed. And all these companies, what are they doing? Doing a quick dog paddle so they don't drown. Yes, Nahan Ninji is right. You, as public taxpayers, have a right to ask for inquiry to this woman, your premier, and also the guy who's the leader of the Separatist Party, this Roth fellow, having connections with First Nations Children's Trust Fund. Okay, and the very fact that 4 months before the elections or even before the signing of that agreement with the treatment center here, half of that money, $35 million was already paid out to this construction company by our former chief and council. By the consent of the lawyer, whose job is supposed to protect the vulnerable, the most vulnerable in my community. I'm one of those vulnerable people, advocating my whole life. How vulnerable can it be when you don't have a partner, children, nothing, and you're thriving, working for your own? Now, imagine tenfold if you're a single parent and the only job you have is working for a chief who's taking money right out of the mouths of your own babies. Like, disgusting. Totally disgusting. I have nothing to lose. I don't have anything to gain either. But for me, when I've talked with young people in my community for the past 3 years, and just talking to them about my understanding of what Nathan Chasinghorse had taken out of the community and who was supporting him in leadership, not just with Tsuutina, but all in Treaty 7. Like the paper trail goes and connects. I mean, you can look at Jeffrey Epstein and all the things and how he connected. Like even the tip of the iceberg, which, hasn't ever been published about racketeering, embezzlement, and tax evasion with Nathan Chasinghorse in the States. When you have the chief's relatives who have construction companies and how he's been associated with Enbridge his whole life, his own company, what they call Wild Rose Company or something. Like the connection has always been there, and at the expense of educated Tsuutina people like myself, or other young people who've gone out to become millionaires, who've worked their due diligence to make a living, to try and help the most vulnerable in our communities. Why do you think I do my podcast for? I have nothing to lose. Why do you think this young man or these men who have been the catalyst for this lawsuit, the one young man only asks for $1 payment to help our nation, to help our most vulnerable, because we know what it's like to live in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis community. There's no pretending about it. There's no shame. We have no shame. We've swallowed that shame. We've buried our loved ones. We still live with this. And not once can I say, as I've grown up, have I ever been ashamed to be Indigenous. I didn't go around at Bishop Grandin High School pretending I was Mexican, that I wasn't First Nations. I didn't go around, paying thousands of dollars for Indigenous ceremonies so that people can say, hey, I am not Catholic, I'm Indigenous, look at the medicine people I have around me. Like, what do you prove? Didn't have to do that. I didn't have to parade around like that because I know who the hell I am. I know who my family is. I grew up in the culture. I was born into it. And yet we have so many people within our community pretending. Like, it's one thing to grow up here, but it's another thing to look at it and say, so many lifetimes our identity evolves. I'm 74 years old. How many identities have I evolved into? And I talk about it in terms of mental health and just how we have to work our due diligence in trusting people. And in trusting people, we're helping because it has an effect on everyone. When you have a self-defeating ideology, it has a ripple effect. And those people who deny Indian residential school, deny their own trauma, and have garnered and championed that they're politicians under the Indian Act and like they don't need to heal, like poo-poo on you. Suck it up, buttercup. Get off that cross. We need the wood for a sweat. As the fry bread burns, again, people can laugh and say anything they want. But when it comes to soap operas and what happens in Indigenous communities, we have to have humor, because if we had to deal with it, we'd be crying. I'd sooner say, as the fry bread burns, this is what's happening in Tsuutina. Bless the hearts of our young people for championing this lawsuit against a former lawyer. In our band meeting, people were standing up saying, this lawyer, Larry Brahm, he's a good man. Yes, he's been a good man. He's been living off the tit of Tsuutina Nation's milk for how many decades? He's not hurting. He's got his own company. He's still associated with Indigenous people. But look at what he did to us. And here we have the new chief in council. They're telling the band members, yes, we know him. We feel hurt too that we have to let him go. But come on. When you're robbing and hurting the most vulnerable, what kind of leadership are you? If you cannot say, I'm sorry, you see the door, get out. You mismanaged how we wanted to protect our women and children and our most vulnerable. My hat's off to the new chief and council. I'm there supporting them. And when they come to me as an elder saying, what should we do with these, these politicians, these corrupt politicians, and some are still on chief and council. For me as an elder, and for me when I talk to other Indigenous female leaders in Alberta and in Canada, we say, charge them. Charge them. I have nothing to be charged against. I've never worked for Tsuutina Nation, how would I put it, for decades, for years. No. My little stint at education director I was burnt. I was burnt so much. Threatened. I said, no, I don't have to do that. My poor mother, bless her heart, when she started addiction counseling and, had to learn how to do budgets and reporting, she did it. My poor mother did it. And you know what? You know what she got for it? She got some young women my age coming up to her, trying to beat her up, walking into her office. This is just a house. Okay, she wasn't making big money. Accusing her of having an affair with their dad. And I wasn't in Canada at the time. When I came home and I found that out, I confronted these young women's older brother who was on council. Now, I'm not going to disclose the power that I had over him. But I did say to him, the reason your mother is thinking this way is because she's depressed. Nobody's paying her attention. By what your sisters are doing, they think they're showing her love and attention. But they're not. They're hurting my mother. I said, you need to talk to them and tell them to quit being violent towards my mother. And he did, and they stopped. So whatever I can do to help people that are the most vulnerable, I will do it. My sister was running for Stampede Indian Princess, and I helped with her speech, and bless her heart, she said, I didn't think I was going to become princess, and so she wrote her speech, she did her talent, and when she was up there were the other contestants were there. Now, one of the contestants was so cocky and conceited, she thought she was going to win. She had this big smirk on her face, just like, I'm going to win. And even the other contestants told my sister, can you move aside? I want to stand beside so-and-so, so when she wins, I'm there to give her a hug. So my sister made room for her. Then they announced the winner, and it was my sister. The look on the woman who lost, to this day, I couldn't believe it. Like poor sportsmanship. But get this, one of the prizes was a traditional beaded outfit to win this title. The lady who designed it was auntie to that woman who thought she was going to be the Stampede Indian Princess. Do you know what she did? She asked the Stampede Indian Day Committee to take back that outfit that was supposed to be my sister's. Like lateral violence and just jealousy and nitpicking and catcalling or whatever. My friend who passed away, I think 20, 30 years now, I was friends with her for 30 years. And I don't want to digress in anything like this, but for me, when I talk about the most vulnerable, yes, my sister was the most vulnerable. She didn't even think she was going to win. But my friend, who I'd been friends with for 30 years, most vulnerable. She had been a nurse's aide, worked in the hospital watching and helping women give birth. And she became a midwife here in Tsuutina. But the violence that she experienced in her own home, the brutality of being beaten, and the terror that man inflicted on her children. She'd be walking into the city with her children because she had no vehicle. And then she got a job with social assistance, and I became friends with her. And our friendship lasted 30 years, over 30 years, until she passed away. And even when she died, I organized her funeral. And all the friendships that I've ever had in my life, I cherish hers the most because she kept my secrets. And even though she thought I was keeping her secret, again, what happens in Tsuutina stays in Tsuutina. And, and it really made me who I am today. I know people that we grow up with who commit crimes have to live someplace. So how is this transformative and restorative justice? As much as we're doing this lawsuit against this lawyer and the implications of what's going to happen within the members in our community who supported this, yes, it's important that people understand. Like it's easy to manipulate, it's easy to corrupt, it's easy to, sit back and just tell lies. But it's easy to be promiscuous. But the reality of anything in life requires hard work, requires trust. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, well, honesty." Yeah, well, you can tell the truth all you want. I mean, it's the way you live. But the reality of, even though you tell the truth, that memory we carry with us every day in our lives of trust has to percolate up somehow to validate that we can trust another human being. And the way the world is right now, so many people are angry. When my brother went to prison, because he with his association with Nathan Chasing Horse, he served his time. And I supported him because he has children. I supported him to the point where I have women in Tsuutina calling me a pedophile for supporting my brother. My brother did his time, and he has children. Now, he lives in Tsuutina, and the reality of it is yes, he lives in Tsuutina, and all these other people, like our former chief and another band counselor who have been charged with sexual assault, they'll come back and they'll live in our community too. But the reality of it is this is what it means to face injustice. Every day of our lives we live with it. In our communities, because we're holistic and collective. And even people might say, well, how can you do that? Because we have to trust. We have to trust that they will not commit another crime again after this. If you love your community so much, you will not do that. Now, I don't know if people even want to understand that or even comprehend the whole nature of why people act the way they act. Like I said, this young man is a millionaire. All he asks for is $1 in payment. When I lived in Utah, I knew a fellow who had a PhD in clinical psychology, a master's in business, and an undergraduate degree in law. Or was it business or law? No, let's see. Engineering, undergraduate degree in engineering, a master's in business, a PhD in clinical psychology. Had lived in Los Angeles, converted to Mormonism, lived in Utah. But during the time in Los Angeles, he knew Ronald Reagan, used to babysit for him. And so when Ronald Reagan became president, he appointed this fellow who was a Native American to work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the Interior of the state. And I was trying to get my green card. I had this just this March. I was asked, why aren't you living in the United States if you've got a green card? I'm sorry, but living in Utah for over 10 years, when we talk about systemic racism and even how the Mormon Church hierarchy and patriarchy, that women, for me as a single woman, I'll never get to heaven because I'm not married to a Mormon man in the Mormon temple. No matter how hardy, bitter, and diabolical and violent they are to me, or misogynistic, whatever. Anyway, that's not saying this fellow that I knew who had his PhD in clinical psychology was like that at all. No, by no means at all. But he had his status card, and he, of course, he's a millionaire. He says, I don't know what it's like to live, as a Native American on reservations. See, in the United States, they don't have Métis or Inuit. But in Canada, we have First Nations. And so, and again, under the Indian Act. But this fellow that I knew, he says, as long as I have my status card, and I show people that I this is my status card, I don't apply to the chief and council of the reservation for money or any help with my businesses. He says, because this is genuine pride. Like, he's not saying genuine pride. He's telling me that he doesn't know what it's like to live in First Nations in the United States. And because of that, he does not really have to have access to that money because he knows they're vulnerable and poor. Now, in Canada, because of this Indian Act, there are so many, since the Indian Act was implemented, so many Indigenous people, we're saying First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, who intermarried, lost their status. Okay, which is sort of really a messy situation. But the reality of it is come on, suck it up, buttercups. We have our own issues in our communities, dealing with people like our former chief, and also families who will do anything to stay on top of the big cheese. Like you say, in war-torn countries, you have militia going next door to door and neighbors saying, yeah, take them. And what do? They take their neighbor and shoot them in front of a firing squad. That mentality is no different here when it comes to working and employment, and just how the colonial construct of those Indian agents set it up, and how blindly these people who needed jobs, who couldn't find employment in the city of Calgary because of systemic racism, and the only jobs they could get would be, dirty janitor, scrubbing, cattle prodding, the dirt, the nitty gritty dirt, that was it. That was it. I mean, I'm grateful that my father took all the shit he could in the military, the systemic racism, calling him down and everything. He did it because he loved his children. And he was an alcoholic. The fact and the horrors that he faced as a child because his father died when he was still a child. And trying to run away from Indian residential school and being punished when he was caught to sleep in the attic, the cold attic where they were keeping the dead bodies of children. Talk about, who is the savage? Who's the monster? Who's the monster in the closet? We look at people who are elected into elected officials like Danielle Smith, and how she parades around and, throwing money left and right by oil companies. Do you know that Calgary is the only city in Canada that is so similar to any American city? We're the most Americanized city in Canada. Why? Because they discovered oil. Calgary's like the Houston of Texas. When I studied in the United States and they were talking about Canada and even the whole presidential systems, I was in the United States 50 years ago when the United States turned 200. And even the pageantry and the blind loyalty to a flag. And the reality too, oh my goodness, how many millions of people are in the United States? I think Canada's, population-wise, is the size of California. So, when we're poo-pooing in terms of separating, this is just one little speck of dust in the whole 8 billion people in the world that Danielle Smith feels that she has so much power. And then you've got this Roth, this company, this lawyer, this whoever the hell he is, taking money from Cree Children's trust funds who is the leader of the Separatist Party in Alberta. Wake up! Wake up! As Indigenous people, when we see non-Indigenous people doing shit like this, and you have the audacity to tell us to check ourselves? To check ourselves, why? Because we're telling you you're stealing the very milk out of the mouths of our babies. We don't even have sovereignty over our children. You take our children away out of our communities if the mom dies, if they have no support. And then when you apply, and you're a degree-holding Indigenous person applying to be a foster parent, applying to help children, you go through so much red tape to get your house approved, to get everything approved. Why? Because, they think we're pedophiles? Why? Because, somebody in our family is a pedophile? Why? All these jurisdictional bullshit coming from somebody who doesn't even know me or know First Nations or what it's like to live in First Nations, Inuit, or Métis communities, pretending that they do and they're doing God's work, whoever their God is. I mean, throughout my life, my parents, that's how they were raised in residential school, this imaginative leader of, the like something that was constructed in the old world. So, I don't want to bash religion, but the reality of it is you've got to look beyond the religion. You've got to look at these corporations. You've got to look at who's making the money, what's happening with this. It's amazing. It's amazing, all these things that have been uncovered. And for me, being in my community and knowing this talk with people, like we talk to each other, we're, really it's disgusting when you think how many times like this McGrath and Malika Holmes and just the like how things were awarded to them, and like even having they've only worked 10%. Could you imagine if this were an Indigenous company and the contract was for $35 million and you were given half of that even though you only worked 10%? Because why? The leadership was going to go into transition. There was a fear that the former chief wouldn't get in. So they had to buy their way into like, okay, it's going to go through. We've already given you the money. Like, this has been a playbook for decades. And I'm just grateful that our young people have seen it and are putting a stop to it. Now that's Tsuutina Nation. But the warning is out there now for Enoch Cree Nation and the Métis Association to take the initiative to question how the money has come in through these companies. They have their own lawyers too. So, hey, it was really hard to let this man go because he made a lot of friends in Tsuutina, allegedly friends. Because you have to question, he knew under the guise of former leader Chief Roy Whitney. He knew. He the benefits and the contractors and just like who was profiting. In the long run, when I've lived my whole life burying the people I've grown up with, I know you can't take it with you. You can't take that money with you. So why try so hard to play this narrative, to go on the world stage and act like your shit don't stink? Act like you're doing the best you can for your Indigenous people. All people have to do is ask me. Ask me. I'm the most vulnerable. I'm an elder now. My status from being a single woman, like there's still always that. There's always going to be that cloud of like, oh, she's a female. Like, this whole like, yeah, she ate from the fruit of the tree when creation and Adam and Eve. She's an Eve. Don't trust her. Oh my goodness, what can I say? Like, I get such a kick out of talking with non-Indigenous women, and because the struggles they have, like even the fellow who died in the States, uh, like the what they call all the stuff, the perversion starts percolating up, like the hush money he paid for his bisexual, homosexual affairs. Like, hello, First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities, you hey, there's a reason we have humor, okay? Like, in the world where it's non-Indigenous and you have all these people pretending, like, excuse me, who's calling the kettle black here? We know what's happening within our communities, and we talk about it. We say something. Until we actually get all the ducks in the row, then we have we have a backbone. We have something to fall back on. But when you have these elected officials in the States and in Canada and in Alberta who put on these airs of like, I'm this moral person. I've created ICE. I've created these concentration camps. And I didn't go with Jeffrey Epstein. Like, like, hello. That's what was happening here in Tsuutina when it came to Nathan Chasing Horse and him being arrested. Scattered. People just scattered. And here I am still talking about Nathan Chasing Horse, rightfully so. Different leadership went to housing and threatened if they did not pay the rent, they would be fired. Like, hello. That's what I mean. Do you think people are just going to roll over and not tell? It's like my white friend says, Marina, you say people don't know you went to Las Vegas twice with a white man. They know, Marina. And I'm going, no, I didn't tell anybody. Marina, they know. And I said, you know what? As long as I don't have people from Tsuutina that I'm talking to, and they're not talking to me, like actually calling me and asking me what, I'm grateful they're not calling me and asking me, because you know what? What I don't know will not hurt me. Okay? So I put it out there on podcast. Yes, everything and anything I do in terms of just my privacy. I have a network of friends that I talk about how I feel about human beings, because I have to. I'm human. But, in the whole process of it, when I see these politicians and these leaders, and I'm going, how come you don't do that? How come you don't do your due diligence and trust people and talk about how you feel about someone you're attracted to? Because it's hard work. It's studying. There's a reason why people get their bachelor's degree, their master's, and their PhDs. They work at it. They fundamentally work at it because it has to balance. That when you're making your artist statement, you have to defend your work. So even when I say I trust this person, I have to defend how I trust this white man. This is it's work. You have to do it. And that's what I require too for my non-Indigenous friends. Do you have it in you to be challenged by what people say about me being in a relationship with you? Because whatever stereotype or whatever misogyny, whatever gaslighting, can you see through that and be my friend? And if not, I still have other people I can talk to who can defend me. It takes work. Like I said, it's an evolution of identity over decades and decades. It's having friends and learning from the mistakes you made in trusting the wrong people. It's learning why do they behave this certain way, and understanding. So everything I do in terms of intergenerational trauma, the reasoning why it's important to heal, so that when you as you grow and you try advocating for the most vulnerable, you have a backbone to stand on. So kudos to the Chief and Council from Tsuutina Nation, those young men and women who are doing due diligence to protect the future generations of our children, who are out there knowing what it's like to bridge that gap. No other First Nations is like that. And I say, I grew up, bust into the city, I was white in the city, came home, was Indigenous. 2 different environments my whole life. Now, some Indigenous people live their entire lives in urban areas. Some Indigenous people live their entire lives away from the urban setting. We are so diverse in our cultures and the ways of thinking and knowing. But the bottom line is, it's to show compassion, to show forgiveness, to learn how to trust, and to be a good relative. In the Sioux custom, we say, "Wopida midakia pio wasana." Thank you for being a good relative, all my relations. Because that's how we've survived for thousands, 20, 10, thousands of years. We've survived this past 500 years of colonization. The remnants of the ideologies and the storytelling and the traditions and how we carry that body memory. Do you know in Japan a child discovered that butterflies carry genetic memory from generation after generation? And it's amazing how he discovered that. So understand this, as human beings, what we carry in our DNA and our body memory. We're a very complex organism that Creator has created. A lot of the things that we see in the Great Mystery all has to do with how we choose to live and where we choose to live and how we choose to interact with other people. And as it is, it only appears, the Great Mystery somehow just sort of twinkles a little bit when we pass away. So people in the community step back and, all of a sudden, something that you forgot about, something that you did with somebody decades ago in a different identity surfaces, and that's what they remember. And that's what they'll carry with them. So it's important to, be a good relative. I looked for that in Nathan Chasing Horse because that's part of the culture. When he couldn't show me he was a good relative, because it has to balance out. I'm just grateful I had an opportunity to see him. I want my audience to understand this. I hadn't seen him, hadn't written to him, hadn't talked to him in 20 years. That's the impact of trust, the betrayal of what he did and who he hurt. That's how much it means to belong. That's what was taught to me. So with that, I share my podcast and I talk about this whole separatist movement and how it's affected and continues to hurt First Nations people, Inuit and Métis communities. Like I said, this mental health treatment center is not only Tsuutina, it's Enoch First Nations as well as the Métis Association of Alberta. I can't even comprehend, the leader of the separatist movement, as his company took all that money out of the trust of those Cree children in Slave Lake, I think it was. I hope that you do the research. Like I said, you have to pay to the Toronto Globe and Mail, Tom Caradoso and Carrie Tate. I haven't, but I know you can Google information. And of course, it's going to come to light, and I know we're going to have discussions in Tsuutina about this. And that's okay, because I have no place. Where am I going to go? My late father would always say, I've been shot at, kicked at, and every other at. and my friend in up north, who was instrumental in trying to establish a healing center. She was part of a healing center, and how they took that away from her. And it's these people that I mentioned in this lawsuit with this treatment center, this recovery center. That money would have gone to First Nations, actual First Nations sovereignty. It's one thing to have it built on First Nations. It doesn't mean it's going to be run by First Nations. Do you get my point? This whole process going through Chief and Council is to make sure that Tsuutina Nation has sovereignty over these things. And when it's not, then something's corrupt. So yes, it does mean something. It does mean something to ask questions. And even if it hurts to find the answer, like with that lawyer, he had so many people in band meeting defending him. The betrayal. The absolute betrayal. It happens. So for those who are hurt by what I've said, as my Sioux cousin will say, toughen up, buttercup. or like my late sister-in-law would say, get off the cross, we need the wood to make us sweat. Or like if people wanted to call this series of podcasts that I do, I'd call it As the Bannock Burns. And believe me, I was a child, even before I came, there were grandmothers and aunties who were saying the same word as the Bannock Burns. Because it's us matriarchs who are the backbone of Indigenous communities. Why the hell do you think I know what I know? I like when I first started working with youth in Northern Alberta, part of the training session was when you go into a community, look around and find someone who's just sitting at the gas bar every day, just sits there and watch people go by back and forth. Talk to them. Ask them what they see on a daily basis, and you'll be surprised what they know. Well, that's me. I keep myself very private. I've been I don't want to say an instigator, but I have I'm not perfect. I've like my late friend would say, Marina, you haven't hurt anybody. And it's true. I try not to hurt anybody. She said, Marina, you haven't hurt anybody. Like, I haven't taken any man away from his wife. I haven't, just hurting people. I haven't done that. I haven't, go up to somebody and say, oh, you're a pedophile. It just amazes me just how bad people don't protect their energy and themselves and even friendships, protecting your friendships. I try and do this on a daily basis when I have a memory of a friend. I'll say a quiet little prayer inside to Creator. Say, embrace their hearts, minds, spirits, and souls with protective, reflective, healing energy. Our energy ripples throughout time. And our children are depending on us. As each generation comes, hoping that humanity will keep moving forward and evolving. We're evolving. We hope we're evolving in a good way. Okay, well, I had to post. I just had to, because this has been coming to a head for a long time. And I know there's going to be more coming out. And again, that was the whole purpose of electing a new Chief and Council. That being said, have a good day and, just stay cool. And if you can't stand the smoke out there, stay inside. Thank you.